When it comes to my favourite horror movies, A Nightmare on Elm Street is definitely a top contender. It's a slasher that is unique and has elements to it that aren't normally found in other slashers, as the whole idea of Freddy being a dream demon makes the movie so much more unique and enjoyable. And speaking of that dude, Freddy Krueger is one of the best elements of this movie. He's as scary as ever, but still has his moments of comedy. In fact, Freddy is so good in this film, the only criticism I have for it is that we don't see him as much as I would have liked to. So let's cut the talk and jump straight into it. The movie begins with some awesome shots of Freddy constructing his glove in the opening. These shots let us know that this guy has some fucking bad news, and we know that his victims are gonna have a fucking bad time. After this shot, we are in a dream, made evident by the goat, and the nightgown that Tina is wearing, and she seems to be cosplaying as Scrooge on Christmas Eve. We discover that she's in a boiler room, and is being tormented by the guy who built those fingernails in the beginning. Tina tries to run away, but this strange dream run thing she got going on is not helping. Eventually she comes to a place where she thinks she'll be safe, but no, Finger Glove Guy is there. But don't worry, it was all a dream. Or was it? The next day, the gang pulled up to school, and we're introduced to Nancy, Glenn, and Rod. Tina is telling Nancy about a bad dream, and Nancy just says,
"Get it, Tina. The point is that everyone has a bad dream once in a while."
Later that night at Tina's house, the two are discussing the dreams that they have had, and they realise that the guy in each of their bad dreams is the same person. At the same time, some spooky noises is heard from outside, so Nancy's boyfriend Glenn is sent to investigate. After getting outside, he says the least threatening threat.
"I'm gonna punch out your ugly lights, whoever you are."
Then gets bounced by Rod.
So what's going on here, an orgy or something?
Maybe a funeral, dickhead.
It's just a sleepover date, Rod.
Rod and Tina head straight upstairs and get busy, while Nancy ain't feeling the same, and Glenn has to lie in bed listening to Rod going ham.
Morality sucks.
Yes, it does. After her and Rod are finished, Tina goes to sleep, but wakes up to Rock sitting her window, and it's made apparent that she actually is still sleeping. For some strange reason, Tina goes for a midnight stroll outside to face Freddy. She walks into an alley, and the silhouette of a guy with a cowboy hat appears behind her. And guess what? It's the Krueger man himself, and he ain't playing around. Or is he? Tina is just as confused as us, and we get our first famous one-liner of the film.
Please, God.
This is God.
And we get our first chase sequence of this film. Freddy kicks off the run with the goofiest run I've ever seen. Before teleporting in front of Tina, Tina then runs back into the house but stops as Freddy shows her a magic trick. Tina then makes it to the door, which is locked, which gives Freddy the opportunity to tackle her to the ground and get the upper hand, and shows Tina some more magic tricks. Back in the bedroom, Tina begins thrashing around, waking Rod up. Rod thinks she's in the middle of a brain hemorrhage, until her chest erupts with 4 claw marks. She then starts flying around the room, and hits Rod in the face in the process of it, then flies onto the ceiling before falling onto the bed. Rod, not knowing what to do, runs out of the window, right as Nancy and Glenn bust in. Shit, better get Lieutenant Thompson on the case. Nancy tries to plead that Rod might not all be that guilty, but her mum becomes that annoying passive-aggressive teacher when you forget your homework.
Maybe you don't think murder is serious.
The next day on her way to school, Nancy sees an out-of-shape Matrix agent when she is taken into a bush by Rod, but before he can make his case, Lieutenant Thompson shows up. So Rod decides to try and run, but unfortunately, he just ends up running into more police. So Nancy then continues her journey to school. At school, Nancy is trying her best to stay awake, but quickly slips into a dreamlike state. Oh bro, I'm literally a poet. In her dream, she comes across spooky stuff, like Tina in a body bag. Nancy goes to follow it, and when she gets out of the classroom, she sees it being pulled away by an invisible force. She again goes to chase it, but bumps into a hall monitor with a familiar looking jumper and some familiar looking finger knives. Nancy follows a trail of blood into the boiler room, where she runs into the Krueger man himself, who shows her that he has still got some magic tricks left to show off. Freddy then corners Nancy, and she quickly realises that the only way to escape him is to burn her arm on a boiling pipe, which works, waking her up in the real world. Nancy sees that her burn is now in the real world, so she goes to pay Rod a visit. Rod tells Nancy that Tina died from 4 slashes all at once, and tells her that he too has been having dreams about the guy with the finger knife gloves. Later that night, Nancy goes for a bath, and as she is drifting to sleep, a Freddy glove pops out of the water. But before anything happens, Nancy gets awoken by her mum, warning her about people falling asleep in baths. Nancy decides it's best to ignore this warning and fall asleep again. But this time around, Freddy ain't wasting any time, turning her bath into a deep blue ocean. He almost drowns her, but somehow, Nancy again survives. Nancy then gets a visit from Glenn, who she asks to stay awake and wake her up if anything weird starts happening to her. Glenn agrees and Nancy falls asleep. In her dream, she makes her way to a police station and takes a look at Rod, fast asleep on his bed. But wait, Freddy is there, teleporting through bars and shit. Nancy then looks behind her to find Tina in a body bag. This time, looking more disgusting than ever. Nancy, deciding that this probably isn't the best place to be right now, slowly backs away. But unfortunately for her, Freddy is there, and we get another chase scene. The chase leads Nancy right back to her house, and when she's escaping him, her stairs go all squishy and shit as Freddy torments her.
Help me, please. Save me from...
Freddy.
She somehow makes it upstairs to find Glenn asleep, and Freddy falling through the mirrors. They have a pillow fight, but before Freddy can seal the deal, Nancy's alarm goes off, waking her up. Whilst Nancy is yelling at Glenn, she sees a piece of her pillow float out the window, and realises that Rod is in trouble. At the police station, Nancy and Glenn are asking to visit Rod, but Nancy's dad is slowing them down a whole bunch, giving Freddy the opportunity to ravel up a bedsheet and wrap it around Rod's neck, then tie it to the roof of the ceiling, leaving him hanging and strangling to death, just as Nancy and Glenn walk in. After Rod's funeral, Nancy tells her mum and dad about Freddy, and well, they don't seem too impressed. So Nancy's mum makes her go to a sleep clinic. Nancy goes to sleep under supervision and some supernatural shit starts happening. Nancy then starts bugging out, and when she is awoken, she has white hair, cuts from Freddy's glove, and Freddy's hat, which means she can pull things from her dream into real life. The next day, Nancy confronts her mum about Freddy Krueger, which is the name on the inside of the hat, and she tells Nancy,
"He was a filthy child murderer who killed at least 20 kids in the neighborhood.
did he go to prison, Marge?
The lawyers got fat and the judge got famous, but somebody forgot to sign the search warrant in the right place, and Krueger was free just like that."
Oh. Then Marge admits that her and the other parents of the neighbourhood chased him down to his boiler room and burned it down while he was in it, and kept his finger knife gloves for the trophy. That night, Nancy calls Glenn to tell him who Freddy was. She pitches to Glenn that she's gonna bring him into the real world and he has to beat his ass.
You whack the fucker and we got him. Whack the fucker. Whack the fucker.
Great plan. Later on, Marge takes Nancy's coffee supply, only for Nancy to bust out the backup. And as it approaches midnight, Nancy goes to leave, only to stop as Marge is busting out the midnight vodka. Well, at least Glenn is still. No, he isn't. Her call goes straight to her parents, who take the phone off the line so she can't call back. But Nancy does get a call back, but only to hear a familiar screeching sound which causes her to unplug the phone line. But it rings again just for one famous line.
"I'm your boyfriend now, Nancy."
Nancy goes to leave, only to find herself locked into the house by her own mum. We then see Glenn finally die for not being able to stay awake. And sorry bro, you kinda deserve this one. Nancy calls her dad and tells him that he needs to now beat Freddy's ass as Glenn is dead, and he gives her the same answer you get when you ask your parents to watch you do something cool and they say it's great without even looking.
Lieutenant, they're waiting for you upstairs.
Yeah, sure, I'll be there, sweetheart. Now look, you just get yourself some rest, please.
No, just me. Well, I guess it's time for a cool montage of traps being set up around the place, Home Alone style. Before the games begin, we get a little heart-to-heart between Nancy and her mum, while they make up. Nancy then sets some alarms and goes straight into her dreams. She heads to her basement where the finger knife gloves are missing, and a brand new door has appeared. She heads down the door to, you guessed it, Freddy's boiler room. Lurking in the basement, it's Krueger Man himself. He then chases her, which causes her to jump and fly off a ledge that lands her back in her garden. And right before her alarm goes off, she sees Freddy and jumps on him in an attempt to bring him back into the real world. And, well, nothing happens.
I'm crazy after all.
Maybe you are. Psych! Freddy's ready to terrorise the real world with a glass to the head. Nancy then asks a cop across the street for some help, and being the good guy he is, she receives none. Freddy's ready to peace out, but gets a sledgehammer to the ribs, falls backwards down the stairs, and trips on a tripwire that ignites a lamp full of gunpowder. The showdown continues to the basement where Freddy gets lit on fire and gains an extra 20 pounds. He goes up the stairs, only to fall back down the stairs, and then attempt to climb back up it. Now the police are finally taking Nancy seriously, as her house is on fire. It's made apparent that Freddy has left the basement and headed upstairs. Nancy and her dad pursue the footsteps into Marge's room to find a flaming Freddy strangling her. Lieutenant Thompson then puts a blanket on the two of them for the fire out, but once taken off, we see Marge's burned corpse floating above an abyss that slowly fades away. Nancy then gives her dad a hug goodbye as she knows what has to be done. She turns her back to the bed, allowing Freddy to reappear behind her, only to tell him that he is powerless and as she doesn't fear him anymore, causing him to fade away. That is a very lucky gamble that you've pulled off there. She then goes to leave and opens a door into a bright sunny day where the gang is alive and her mum ain't been murdered yet. Well, Nancy gets in the car and the roof falls over them, revealing that they're in a Krugermobile. And when the possessed car drives away, Marge sees the jump rope girls and a claw comes through the window behind her and drags her through it. Bro, that looks so freaking bad. Well, that was a pretty lame ending for one of the best films in slasher history. Despite the bad ending, I think the film is just really good fun and entertainment, as you can't really get bored watching it. I mean, yeah, it's a little bit cheesy and the quality of the effects aren't up to today's standards, and if we ignore the gaps in logic, and how old it is, I would strongly recommend somebody to watch it, especially if you are a first time viewer, as from my experience, this film is best enjoyed the first time you watch it. And plus, it is way better than the remake that came out in 2010, as that film is not so good. I'm probably going to recap the second and third film in the franchise over the next week, so stick around if you enjoyed it and drop a sub. As always, thank you for joining me, and I'll see you in the next one. Goodbye.